you have to blame defund the police, because their actual political execution is so sorry, and it is so poorly done.
We are creating thousands of jobs. I don't ever want to see it again.
Buttigieg would be the first openly gay cabinet secretary if confirmed. You're watching MSNBC.
Except for the other openly gay cabinet secretary, Richard Grinnell, although Buttigieg would be the first one who was, I guess, nominated and confirmed, right? I guess there is a qualifier there.
Yeah.
But the administration took my advice. I always thought that he should be a front-facing personality in the administration. Cabinet post is a good idea. He's a talented guy. I had mentioned earlier, and we engaged with a friend of ours and a Twitter friend, by the way. Mm-hmm. You all can meet her. You can see us engaging here and there, named Toast. And she felt that his resume was... That was her, right? She felt that... I said that his resume was thin. She thought that he had a good resume, including military time, which he does have some military time. Mm-hmm. But as far as political appointments... he's got no real beltway experience, and so this does that for him. And this will put him in front of in the rubber chicken circuit and in front of ribbon cuttings, and it'll bring him all around the country as Secretary of Transportation. And it's a good proving ground for him. He's a talented guy. I just thought he was good in the last few months as an attack dog, jumping on Fox News and scrapping with everybody. And I have no belief in common with him politically. I am not a Pete Buttigieg guy.
Well, he's not for Medicare for all.
Okay.
So
I have something in common with him.
I mean, he's sort of, I guess he's considered a moderate. Although he is for a government healthcare option that would outcompete the private sector and become Medicare for all eventually, but he wants people to choose it through their own free will, supposedly. So,
yeah,
but yeah, in theory, he's considered a moderate by the left wing of the party.
Yeah, and I also just appreciated he was not like Klobuchar. He was a guy with thoughtful debate skills, thoughtful answers to questions, and a guy who could think on his feet. And it was fun watching the gears turn with him. Where you had like Shecky Green writing Klobuchar one-liners, which she delivered horribly, consistently. Yeah. It was just terrible. So he's an interesting guy because, like really, the politicians I like the most, he's a guy who gives you something new. It's like Chris Christie used to be that way too. He was unlike anybody, for a while there. And there's a few others. Maybe Rand Paul might be one of those is truly a kind of interesting cat, although he's not a overly pleasant chap. We've interviewed him.
I'm not sure Pete Buttigieg is real. I mean, he seems kind of an angry person too.
He may be when he's eating. He is. We've seen those pictures. We should put those pictures up.
Yeah.
He's angry. That does have a manner, an almost Kasich manner of sternly condemning you, or not condemning you, or.
He does come across like he's condemning you a lot, though. He does, like, his delivery tends to be kind of
admonishing. How about that?
Yeah.
But anyway, so he's going to be in the Biden administration. I don't think he'll have any trouble.
Yeah, he's a good politician, that's for sure.
And of course, nothing is what it is supposed to be anymore. So the Secretary of Transportation, you'd assume, would be in charge of the infrastructure. And yes, he's doing some of that, but the breadth of his responsibilities will be a lot wider than just that.
Pete's got a great perspective of a mayor that solves problems and brings people together. He's got a vision of a...
He brought the black population together in South Bend hating him.
Actually, really, in all the primary states, the black population hated him. He was getting like 0 black votes everywhere.
I don't understand. Okay.
Next generation leader, and with experience and the temperament to lead change today.
All right.
To dig us out of this economic crisis. For example, helping cities and states to keep transit systems running for frontline and essential workers.
Okay. Transit systems running, Sounds like a Secretary of Transportation thing.
Yeah.
No problem with that. And tie in the COVID, the frontline workers, et cetera. Fine.
And then helping them modernize their airports, their ports, their railways.
Makes totally sense.
Still transportation,
This
right?
is what you
I've
want
got
him to be doing.
Right?
To attract and retain businesses and workers.
Sure.
To advance racial equality, racial equity, as we build back better and include everyone. To deal with the existential threat of climate change with real jobs. Not just $15 an hour job, which I'm going to call for universally.
That went south quickly. Great. That means he's got to be absolutely a true believer in the Green New Deal and sufficiently woked up. And so, the thread through every now department in every cabinet position is going to include social justice. Or at least the language change in the symbolic gestures there. And, of course, climate change, which is so freaking, it's so boring. If I could force people to take Rorschach is pictures, Heimlich is for choking. What's the one for lying?
I don't know.
What's the lie
detector test?
Yes, but it's called
I don't have
polygraph.
Oh, okay.
If I could give everybody the polygraph test, I would ask them exactly how deep into buying all of the climate, the stated climate crisis they'd be, because it generally doesn't poll all that well, and it's the thing you're supposed to say yes to. Mm-hmm. But there is not one single climate person or evangelist for the climate change movement who's not a huge, rich hypocrite with a gas-guzzling everything. And you'd think that if we only have 9 years before it's all over, then maybe you and your friends would stop jet-setting and stop having the 50 million acre house on Martha's Vineyard and all that other stuff.
Right.
You'd think somewhere that maybe since, wear a mask. Well, abiding by climate, and carbon minimal ventures is something that we're supposed to be doing for modeling good behavior. It just doesn't happen. I mean, when it comes to the climate things, people are like, I've got money. I'm going to go out and say it's the end of the world. I am not living in a green modular house that's 10 by 10. I'm living large with a lot of cars. And I'll say the right things and vote for Democrats, but you're not getting me to change my politics.
Yeah, and I think that they would argue that that's because the free market has not provided them with energy-efficient alternatives that provide them the same lifestyle that they would otherwise have.
The free market has provided them with small houses. We just moved from one.
But you skipped my qualifier that would provide them with the same lifestyle they would otherwise have. There aren't...
I see.
Yeah, so they'll buy a house that's energy efficient and green and saves the planet if it's the same size and has as many lights and as many garages for their cars and stays as warm in the winter and all that as their house is now. But they're not going to take a hit on lifestyle for that. They'll buy something that's maybe a little more expensive if it's green, but they're not going to actually change the way that they live over it. That's a bridge too far.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't think it helps the cause all that much.
No, I don't think so either. But who is really willing to change their lifestyle? People, rightfully so, in my opinion, people aren't even willing to pay more for gas. I mean, high gas prices are one thing you would need to happen to fix the climate problem, right? Because that would internalize all the externalities of buying gas. It would put the real costs of gas guzzling onto the user of the gas if the gas were more expensive. So, the argument is
the Obama plan.
Right. I'm not saying that gas should be more expensive.
I know.
But I'm saying that even though people believe in climate change, quote unquote, they still don't want their gas to be expensive, which is something that would need to happen. But again, they would argue that that's because they haven't been provided with a cheap alternative that works just as well, that they don't have to plug in every 100 miles or whatever. So there's a belief on the left, I think, that if you just make the federal government pour enough money into it, that they will magically be able to invent technologies that don't currently exist that would make it easy for everybody to go green. That we could get solar panels on every house and have everybody be using the sun's energy instead of fossil fuels to heat their homes and run all their electricity. That everybody could have the cool cars that they want that could go as far as they wanted to if we would just invent the magical way to do that. And that the problem is just that there's a lack of capital and a lack of investment. Never mind the fact that these companies have been getting investments in the forms of tax breaks for years. I mean, Tesla's business model wouldn't even be sustainable without the subsidies that they get. And look at all the green energy debacles that we poured money into before.
To Tesla's credit, they do have some quality products.
Right. They make stuff
the cars
works, but the cars wouldn't be as affordable, and they're not that affordable, but they wouldn't be as affordable as they are without the subsidies that they have. And then Tesla wouldn't be able to sell enough of them to make ends meet, so which is fine. But the left wants the idea of the Green New Deal is doing a lot more of that, subsidizing a lot more, pouring that money into industries that don't currently exist in order to make them exist, and hopefully that would work and make the world be green, But look at Tesla's solar roof tiles, right? So this is something we've gone back and forth on in our life, because I like the idea of being off grid and getting our energy from solar and, not having to rely on the electrical grid, more because I'm like a prepper than any other reason, truly. But okay, whatever it takes. But we have a really kind of nice looking old house, a colonial, and we don't really want to put, well, first of all, we're a little scared that the framing of our house wouldn't hold up if we put a bunch of solar panels on our roof. And second of all, we aren't sure that we love the idea of how it looks to have our old colonial covered in solar panels. So every time I say this, people are like, oh, what about Tesla's roof tiles? Because Tesla has a very cool promo video about these tiles that look lovely and look just like regular roof tiles. And it's been out, probably 5 or 10 years, Tesla's stupid promo video about their solar roof tiles. And they hold up in all weather, and they look just like a normal roof. You can't even tell. They're mixed in with the regular tiles. They cost the same amount as a regular roof, and they provide all the energy your home needs. And then you have a Tesla battery in your basement, and they feed into that, so you can be off grid all the time. The only problem is they don't exist yet. Tesla's put a few kind of beta test ones in on a few houses in California, but it's been years. And if you want one, the way you do it is you sign up on their website. You give them $1,000 to hold your place in line for the imaginary technology that does not yet work. And then maybe if they get it working and they get enough installers and they're able to do what he claimed he was going to do in his TED Talk or whatever they call these things, where the founders of companies go out and explain what all their new products are, then if they ever get to that point, then you'll be in line to get it. But it doesn't exist, and there's no guarantee of when it will ever exist if it does. And at least Apple, when they have their presentations about new products that they have coming out, like their new $600 headphones that are over-ear headphones, at least those products are things that you can actually go buy. The Tesla solar roof, you can't buy.
Right.
It's pretend. So the left is thinking if we just throw a bunch more money at it, then we can get a bunch of these unicorn magical technologies to exist that will solve all the problems and make the choices easy, and everyone will just be able to go green because it will be cheap and easy and work and be efficient and be such a great investment. But there's no guarantees. Ask anybody who runs a company or anybody who invests in companies, any angel investors or VC investors. There's not a guarantee that just because you throw money at a problem that needs to be solved, that a solution just appears out of the air that solves all the trade-offs.
There's no guarantee. Well, actually, this was solved. A lot of this was solved more than 50 years ago when we started using nuclear power. Right. True. But the crisis is not that dire, apparently, so we can't use nuclear power because there was an accident in the late 70s and then a movie. And then, an earthquake in Japan broke another big nuclear reactor. And then the Russians covered up their idiotic nuclear meltdown. So And all the renewables, the problem is the storage of the energy. That technology isn't there yet either. So you can have windmills going all day and night, and the East Coast and the West Coast, but there's nowhere to store the energy you create. So it's only good while it's windy out there.
Right. And you still typically need a bunch of fossil fuels to make all these things.
Right.
You need to create windmills. It takes a whole bunch of steel, and you have to drive all these parts up mountains and clear cut trees that normally would be sucking up carbon out of the air and all this other stuff. And it's not clear that windmills, once you account for everything, actually help during the lifespan of the machinery. It's still kind of an up in the air question. So I don't know what the answers to all these things are. Certainly nuclear would be a good answer if you really think that this is an existential crisis. There's also some cases out there. Somebody's made the case that that overall we'd be better off in terms of cost just to deal with the effects of climate change as they crop up, Oh, Manhattan's going to be underwater. Manhattan is not going to be underwater. I can tell you, there's a lot of people with a lot of money who will make sure that Manhattan is not underwater.
Yeah,
and they'll deal with that problem when we get to it.
We'll sooner drain the ocean than they'll have their brownstones submerged.
That's going to be, okay, Lower Manhattan will not be in New York Harbor. That's not going to be something that's going to happen. So there's a case to be made that we'd be better off to deal with the problems of climate change as they happen than invest a bunch of money in maybe being able to solve the problem, but maybe not, So I don't know. I don't think there's denying that climate change happens and that we contribute to it, but that doesn't answer the question of what should we do to fix it.
Right. Completely agree, Alice. Completely agree. Thank you.
How did we even get discussing this?
Because that's part of Buttigieg's job.
Oh,
Social
right.
As
It's
the
solving
Secretary
the
of
climate.
Transportation and solving climate. And the good thing is he'll be in Massachusetts plenty to deal with our broken rail system and our subway
Which we just
system.
cut dramatically, did we not?
Yes, we did.
Because no one's using it. Because they're all at home.
For some reason. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the cops aren't allowed to use it, we know, if they're, cracking down on looting.
Right.
Which is a real thing here in Massachusetts. The MBTA, which is our transportation authority, it decided that police were not allowed to use the transportation system, to stage for protests during Black Lives Matter and the subsequent riots. So that's great. All right. Where are we, Alice? Should we let's hit Tom Cruise really quickly. I've got no problem with this, but now you've probably heard this audio. Tom Cruise lost his bleep on set. I think the background of this is that the guys weren't social distancing. The crew wasn't social distancing. So he's worried that they're going to get shut down, and he lost his friggin' mind. And I grew up in a time when you'd have bosses like this, and I have no problem with it. I am not.
Well, the left loves it. I hope you know. They're all thrilled. The lefties, because he's yelling at people to follow COVID rules. So they want him. They want one of him in every store in America, pretty much.
But listen to his reasoning.
Okay.
Between the expletives.
I'm on the phone with every studio at night. Insurance companies. Producers. And they're looking at us and using us to make their movies. We are creating thousands of jobs, you I don't ever want to see it again. Ever. And if you don't do it, you're fired. And I see you do it again, you're gone. And anyone on this crew does it. That's it. And you too, and you too, and you. Don't you ever do it again. That's it. No apologies. You can tell it to the people that are losing their homes because our industry is shut down.
Here, Tom Cruise. That is great. He's trying to protect the jobs and the people who are losing their homes. These are like good conservative values, and I appreciate it.
Those are good. It would be better if they just weren't getting shut down because...
Well, no, absolutely, but they are, and so he's telling people to step the hell in line so we don't screw up a good thing here. I've got no problem with it whatsoever. For a guy who's 4'1", he is.
He does.
He can project his voice. I've got no problem with that, and I like it. I like him. I don't like the beating he's taken in Hollywood because he's the weird one because he's a Scientologist. Yeah, look in the mirror, Hollywood, California.
Scientology is pretty weird.
Look in the mirror, Hollywood, California, where you all want to be famous superstars, so people will say they love you. Yeah, you're all doing well. Please. And
Scientology is bad, for the record.
I don't care about what religion is what or what cult is what. I don't care. No Scientologist has ever bothered me. And I've got no problem with it. And in fact, a couple of times in one of my jobs working in hotels, we used to have to set up meetings for the Scientologists, including setting up a chair for L. Ron Hubbard himself, who had been dead decades by then, in case he showed up. And that's
like their version of Elijah coming to the door so that you have to...
I guess so. I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
But we would have to set that up. And also, the weird thing is that these Scientologists, they drank a bleep load of water. So we'd have to go in there with emergency crews and just fill up more water.
Are they anti-drinking?
I don't know, but they weren't like, it wasn't a great meeting because they weren't buying a coffee break or a buffet or anything like that. Okay. They just needed chairs and water. And then they'd do whatever they did. So
beam up to their spaceship or whatever they do. Yeah.
I don't know what they do. I know they used to have a cool boat at one point in the 60s.
Yeah.
Which seems like that would have been fun. I don't know. You know what?
It seems like the people that leave the cult.
If you're listening right now and you're in a cult or you have a cult that's offering, that's looking for people, send the information to me and let me know what your program is like. I am open. I'm looking around.
You can join the Jesus cult.
I'm looking around, by the way. This is Schofer Hefer, Grapefruit Hefeweizen Beer, B-I-E-R. In case your cult is looking for recommendations. But Alice, I don't know where I am on Jesus. I've got to do a lot of soul searching. What is their particular offering?
Scientologists or Jesus?
No, for the Christians, what is...
That's a long story. I think we should probably take that conversation offline because I'll fill you in later.
Okay. Okay, so that's Tom Cruise, and we celebrate him. Now, what's made me excited today, Alice, is an incredible interview with...
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Alice. Yes. And she did an interview with this guy from The Intercept, a guy named Jeremy Scahill. Do you know him?
I don't think I do.
He is a true believer. It seems to me that he's probably a democratic socialist or maybe just a socialist as well. I don't know. I can't be sure. But he certainly bonded with her quickly, and they were talking the talk. And I think these cuts we have are very revealing. And among other things, you can see that she is making the plan to make the move. And it starts with, and you may have heard this in the news here, it starts with, he asks a great question. Where's all the relief for people? And she answers this with a canniness that is going to get her places.
Why on earth has the Congress not given more aid to the American people, particularly poor and working people in this country who are suffering during this pandemic? The last round was just a huge boondoggle for corporate interests and businesses. Why has there been no aid forthcoming to the American people right now?
You know, honestly, I have been frustrated and heartbroken and very angry trying to figure out the answer to this question. You know, I think on one hand, it's very easy to say that Mitch McConnell and the Republican Party is extraordinarily barbaric, which is true. But at the same time, there is still something to be said for the fact that President Trump did want stimulus checks out, and we still even haven't been able to get those.
So McConnell will put him aside, she's saying. Trump, he's looking to spend money, she's saying.
And even in this package that's currently being negotiated, there aren't stimulus checks in the current kind of state of negotiations. And so why hasn't Congress done this? I think that there is a real lack of urgency.
So Scahill, the interviewer, is smart. He understands that leaves one person, not mentioned as yet, and so he puts the question to her.
Isn't this grounds, though, to take a stand and say, no, I'm sorry, Nancy Pelosi should not be the speaker and Chuck Schumer should not be the leader?
Well, I do think that we need new leadership in the Democratic Party. I think one of the things that...
It's a bold thing to say. It's not as...
Yeah.
Right. Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and her circle, they have the guns and the bayonets pointed out of the circle. Mm-hmm. And they are ready to... Nancy Pelosi picks off Democrats who are 18 steps away from even becoming a threat. When she notices that they start to look like a threat, she mobilizes.
Why do you think Seth Moulton, I think, is his career is like dead in the water?
Oh, yeah.
His presidential run went nowhere. He's never doing anything interesting in Washington. You never see him getting any good assignments. Because he tried to lead a coup against Pelosi. And that was a non-starter. He is done. And then you look at somebody also in our Massachusetts congressional delegation here, who I always talk about. And people never believe me when I say this. I know I have a friend who is always talking to me about this too. But Catherine Clark, from Melrose in the Massachusetts congressional delegation, is now the second highest ranking woman in Congress, and you've never heard her name. Nobody pays any attention to what Catherine Clark's doing. She is not making any waves. She's not challenging Pelosi. She's not doing interesting interviews with Democratic socialists talking about things she can do. Last time I heard, she was getting the Pause Act passed, which was something about caring for pets and stuff. And I mean, literally, it's the most boring career, but she's like going to be the next Pelosi.
She's a soldier. She's a loyalist soldier.
She shows up when she's supposed to show up. She supports who she's supposed to support. She goes to the right fundraisers. She hangs out with the right people, and she absolutely is going to be anointed as the next big thing very soon.
To use the mafia vernacular even more, you said fundraisers. You're right. She's also a good earner.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that is a big part of it.
I have struggled with, I think that a lot of people struggle with, is the internal dynamics of the House has made it such that there's very little option for succession, if you will, and I think that...
Right, that's because the Pelosi's bath party has gone in there and assassinated any possible threat and, deconstructed any kind of burgeoning infrastructure that would pose a threat.
One could just... I think it's easy for someone to say, oh, well, why don't you run? But the House is extraordinarily complex, and I'm not ready. It can't be me. I know that I couldn't do that job. And so even conservative members of the party...
She's right. That's a good observation, a good answer. She can't do that job. That's not her skill set. She's a on-the-ground activist. She's a mobilizer. She's a communicator, of course. We know that. But she's not a field general.
Who think Nancy Pelosi is far too liberal for them, don't necessarily have any viable alternatives, which is why whenever there's a challenge, it kind of collapses. And that is, I think, the result of just many years of power being concentrated in leadership with a lack of, real grooming of a next generation of leadership. And so when you have really talented members of Congress that do come along, the opportunities to lead are so few and far between that they leave.
It's a great observation.
Yeah.
She's right. She sees that where the X's and O's are.
I mean, it's funny because Trump gets criticized a lot for how he wants loyalty from people and how he's obsessed with loyalty, that he cares way more about loyalty than competence or anything else. So he only wants people that are going to stick by him and support him at all costs, at all times.
Right.
And it's funny because the Democratic leadership is the same way. And AOC is the only person who will call them on it, Nancy Pelosi is the biggest, she remembers who has betrayed her, and she will make sure those people never go anywhere. She is big into loyalty. It's only, I mean, Trump just gets bad PR for it, but the Democrats absolutely run their stuff this way. All you have to see is look at the way, and to their credit, the Bernie people were really mad about this and still are. I assume AOC probably is. Look at how right when it looked like Biden was going to be in trouble, all the moderates dropped out of the presidential race and endorsed him.
She's going to talk about that in a moment.
That's funny.
But as far as the protectorate around her goes, remember, all those people are on the ascendant. Ascendant?
Ascent.
They are ascendant.
Yes.
So that includes, like you said, Catherine Clark. Remember who that also included just a few years ago? From New York, Joe Crowley. One of her most trusted protectors, captains, was Joe Crowley, who was knifed to death by whom?
AOC.
Right.
And it tends to be people in really liberal districts because those are people who aren't vulnerable. They're going to be there a while. Crowley had an insane amount of money in his bank account. AOC beat him, and this is always, the right always says this, like this is a knock on her. Like she only won that primary with 18,000 votes or something, which for a congressional race isn't much because nobody thought that anybody could beat this guy. So it's the really liberal districts. Pelosi's the same way. She's in a really liberal district. She can stay as long as she wants because she's going to kneecap anybody who tries to run at her from the left. I mean, forget that.
Right. Well, and also with AOC is, remember in that race, she was insignificant. It didn't matter. It's this girl who's a bartender.
Yeah.
Without Pelosi and Crowley and the people realizing that it's because she was a bartender that people loved her.
Right.
She was a working person.
Of course.
Which also, in an odd way, although he's in a different station, is also the populism of Trump for
of course.
a lot of the country. So this guy, Scahill, the interviewer who works for The Intercept, puts a question to her again.
Are you ready to say Pelosi and Schumer need to go?
I mean, I think so. I mean, and the question is, like this year, for example, the hesitancy that I have is that I want to make sure that if we're pointing people in a direction, that we have a plan. And my concern, and this I acknowledge as a failing, as something that we need to sort out, is that there isn't a plan. How do we fill that vacuum? Because if you create that vacuum, there are so many nefarious forces at play to fill that vacuum with something even worse. And so the actual
nefarious forces. This is a Democrat talking about the Democratic Party.
Sad state of affairs is that there are folks more conservative than even they are willing to kind of fill that void. And so what I'm looking at right now is what steps do we take, both in structural changes, because a lot of this is not just about these two.
When she says conservative, she means bad, by the way.
Personalities, but they are also about the structural shifts that these two personalities have led in their time in leadership, the structural shifts of power in the House, both in process and rule, to concentrate power in party leadership of both parties, frankly, but in Democratic Party leadership to such a degree that an individual member has far less power than they did 30, 40, 50 years ago. We need to shift power. We need to make sure that we have a transition of power in the leadership of the Democratic Party, because I think that the hypocrisy you point out is so animating. Frankly, it's a huge reason why I ran for office and ran against a Democrat, because that hypocrisy can be just so rage-inducing for any person. For me personally, it was when I was waitressing and I would hear Democrats talk about why the Affordable Care Act was so amazing all the time and how this is the greatest thing ever and the economy's doing wonderfully. And frankly, it is the same trick that Trump pulls, which is, people touting the Dow as a measure of economic success when we're all getting killed out here. And so, do we need new leadership of the Democratic Party? Absolutely. But how do we ensure that when we shift, we don't even move further to the right? And that's the kind of thing that keeps me up when I think about what we're going to do moving towards the future.
Right. So you hear AOC there, and it's really, it's telling because it is a lot like Trump. Trump understands this too. The reason Trump wanted stimulus checks to go out is because he knows that this makes a real difference to people. He knows what makes people tick in terms of who they vote for and what they care about. Getting a check in the mail is real. AOC knows that because she was a bartender and she was on the ground. She was living with working people. So the self-congratulatory attitude of people on the left who are in, these kind of elite circles of academia and Washington and lobbyists and consultants and economists and the important people who are making policy are sitting here and telling you the economy's doing so great. We've done a wonderful job. Our healthcare package is amazing. But if you can't pay your rent, that doesn't mean anything to you. And both parties, frankly, have been terrible on this messaging. And AOC understands that, and Trump understands that.
Yes. Yes.
That's what I was just saying before you came back in. Trump understands that. That's why he was so anxious to get the stimulus checks out, because he knows that's real to people, and that's what the Democratic Party misses. They're complaining about, who's going to pay for the stimulus checks for regular working people. If you look at the actual numbers of what was proposed when Bernie Sanders and Josh Hawley, who's a conservative Republican who was working with Bernie Sanders to try and get stimulus checks done, they could send everybody the same amount they got in the spring, and the whole thing would cost $300 billion. And they're talking about a $1 trillion package, a $900 billion or $1 trillion package that doesn't include those because that's too expensive. We can't afford that. Well, you know what? Small business loans are great and blah, 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 but that takes time to hit people. The PPP, you have to approve the loans to the businesses. The business has to spend it on payroll. Then they have to pay you, for your job, assuming that you still have a job working at the business, that it's not totally gone by the time this even happens. But, the IRS sends you a check and you get the check. You can pay your bills with that. That's something. Right. And that costs a lot less than the PPP program and these other things. It's not as expensive as doing this stuff, and it's not as expensive to administer. The IRS is built at a scale where it is designed to be dealing with 300 million people. The local unemployment office has been backlogged. Tom and I dealt with this because we had somebody trying to file for unemployment under our name, and it took forever to get it taken care of because you would call, the lines were backed up, the system would hang up on you.
They didn't just try.
Oh, they did. Yeah, they filed and they got like $900 a week plus the $600 a week for
if
like
you're out
months.
There and you got my money
for months. It's all organized crime. It's not like a one-off person doing it. They did it en masse. But even so, even just the people that actually were unemployed, it was too many, and it swamps the local unemployment system because the local unemployment system is only designed to be dealing with the 5% of people who are normally unemployed at any given time.
Tell them the story about the IRS, the second floor people versus the first floor people.
Oh, right. But the IRS, my point was, is designed at a scale where they do deal with every American already. So they're actually at a scale where they can do this and get it done efficiently. These other programs are not as efficient. But yeah, when we were trying to get this thing taken care of with the stupid unemployment office, and we would call
somebody cashing checks in my name.
Yeah, you would call and call and call and call, and eventually you would get somebody. And they wanted to escalate you to tier 2 because they didn't have the power to do anything. They could put like the fraud flag on the account, but nothing was happening. And it was months were going by, and they're like, yep, we put the fraud flag on, but nothing else is happening. We can't do anything about it.
Tier 2 were a higher ranking group of...
They always try and transfer you to tier 2.
Right.
But tier 2... the system hangs up on you when they transfer you to tier 2.
And you tell them that
either
swamped or dead.
So you would always go like... Okay, because you would tell them your story, you would wait on hold, and you would call back and call back and call back, and then eventually you would get somebody who was tier 1, and then they would want to transfer you to tier 2 once they heard what was going on with you, and then they would transfer you, and it would dump you. So eventually I got to the point where I would say, like, don't transfer me. Are you sure you have to transfer me to tier 2? Because I never have been talked to tier 2. And they said, yeah, this always happens. We always transfer people to tier 2 and the calls get dropped, and we don't know why there's just too many of the calls that we have to transfer there, and there's not enough of them or whatever, and the system drops everybody. But, if our whole room of people, if we do get somebody to tier 2, the whole room cheers. We're all so excited because eventually, a few times a day we'll get somebody through to tier 2.
Got to tier 2. Doesn't necessarily mean anything good's going to happen.
So anyway, that was all this whole thing. And but that's the state unemployment system trying to deal with a huge unemployment problem that's many, many times bigger than they ever deal with. And so if people are dependent on this type of state administration, the administration of loans, administration of unemployment, other benefits from the state level, first the federal government has to get it to the states, and then the states have to, we're all going to be dead here. It's going to be a skeleton waiting on hold with the Office of Unemployment Assistance in every state, because you can't, they don't know how to administer these things at this scale. They can't do it. They're terrible at it. The IRS can actually get people checks, and it's way cheaper and it's way more efficient, and it actually helps people. I'm not saying that these programs aren't like very smart people who know a lot of economics in Washington have all sat down and, they want to incentivize people to work. So it would be better for the people to have jobs. I agree. It would be better for people to have jobs. But right now they already don't. We're already past that point. So they're like, so we'll loan the businesses money, but we'll make a rule that they have to spend it for payroll. So then they'll hire people and then they'll pay them with the payroll from the loan. It all sounds very smart. It sounds very good. But the bottom line is that takes a lot more moving parts to actually get to people. And it's better if the government just gets out of the way and lets the money get to the people who need it, because we are in crisis mode right now.
Right.
How many people are out of work, and how many people are going to be out of work a month from now as places, especially in the Northeast, are shutting more stuff down every day.
Right. And January 1st essentially is the start of it's not only literally the start of a new year, but for budgets, it's also a kind of a start of a new year. And unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of people trying to get to tier 2, I think, on the phone.
Good luck to you.
It sucks. By the way, in local breaking news, Alice, it looks like the Speaker of the Massachusetts House is leaving.
Is this Spilka? Is that who it is?
No, Bob DeLeo.
Okay. Oh, that's the Senate is Spilka, right? Who's the one that replaced Rosenberg? Okay, sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, I had it mixed up.
Bob DeLeo, who actually, on the lines of what we're talking about here, is for Massachusetts. He's kind of, I wouldn't say Pelosi. He's an old school Democrat. So he's not, his town is Winthrop, where Trump won, I think. And so that means we're losing another moderate.
Right.
On Beacon Hill.
Interesting.
And we don't have too many left here in Massachusetts. And if you're from the Northeast, you know how that feels. AOC also is salty about the new people joining the Biden administration. She is absolutely ticked off. It is a who. It's not only just retreads, of course, but it's also these are a lot of literally McKinsey people. One of them just joined today.
It's horrible. And I think it's also part of a larger issue that we have right now, which is there's a lot of talk about, the Biden administration is bringing back a lot of Obama appointees, which, depending on where you are in the party, may sound nice, I guess. But I think what a lot of people...
She is scorched earth, though.
Oh, yeah.
She's saying... Obama, for many in the Democratic Party, is not to be toyed with. You don't disparage him, and she just absolutely has no problem doing it.
Fail to remember is that, we now have a Biden administration that's bringing back a lot of Obama appointees. But when Obama was making appointments, he was bringing back a lot of Clinton appointees.
There's another faction gets both barrels. Another political family gets both barrels.
You want to be a rising star in the Democratic Party, and you have now blasted Obama and blasted the Clintons.
You're like
Pelosi.
It's Trumpian. She's blasting the exact swamp.
And so this is not just a revolving door of private industry, but it's a revolving door of just these same people for the last 10, 20, 30 years in a time when this emerging populism And one of the main reasons, a huge reason why we got Donald Trump in the first place, in addition to just the racism that was waiting to be reanimated in this country, was just an extreme disdain for this moneyed political establishment that just rules Washington no matter who you seem to elect. And it's not just individuals, but it's an ideology and it's a way of doing things. And it's, this hand over fist self-dealing, and it's, this continued commitment to foreign wars that, frankly, people all across the political spectrum in the United States are sick of.
She's calling the Democrat establishment warmongering hawks.
Right. So Steve Schmidt, she's not going to be calling you up anytime soon, I would say. Do you think that's fair? If she's against self-dealing, warmongering, and the Washington establishment.
And, especially when it comes to foreign policy, we're really in an appalling state. This is why we had so many people, rally behind different Democratic nominees. But now the situation is like, what do we do? Because the fact of the matter is that the most conservative, I would say probably the most conservative Democrat in the field is the one that won.
Damning. And so, I'm glad you mentioned Steve Schmidt, because she's going to go there as well in this one and say that everybody's always telling them and telling Democratic voters that you have to vote for guys like Joe Biden. Good old-fashioned, the warmongering, credit card company beholden guys like Joe Biden.
It's not just elected Democrats, but it also seems like the Democratic electorate seems to believe that conservative Democrats are the ones that win. And it's almost as though our electorate is tricking itself. It's like we all know that we want something different, but we're so afraid of losing, or at least we're told that if we indulge what we want, we're going to lose. And so this is an issue that we're going to have to really organize around in terms of an electorate, but then publicly, we're absolutely going to have to resist, because there is a consensus, and bipartisan consensus in Washington, as much as it is heralded, is almost always around Wall Street bailouts, extension of war, mass surveillance.
Yeah, as much as it's heralded. She is so street smart. She is so street smart. It is. I know that she's a clueless ideologue dummy who unfortunately has a degree from BU and an expensive degree, and so it's it's made her dumber. I think having gone to BU, I think the bartending years made her smarter.
Oh yeah.
But
I don't get this thing. And I mean, I assume there are some Republicans who do knock her for being a bartender, although I don't really know any personally. But, people on the left are always like, oh, you hate her because she's a bartender, because she's been. I think that's the best thing about her. That's absolutely her biggest qualification in my eyes for being in Congress, is that she's been a working person.
Right. And she slams the party more because the party, just like Joe Biden did, and all of the talking heads are using the Red Scare.
Red baiting has just intensified throughout these past few electoral cycles. I mean, this has been something that corporate Democrats have always engaged in, but the lengths to which the other candidates for the Democratic nomination went to smear Bernie Sanders.
I love this confab here. We're having a radical left hate fest about the center left, as it were, which isn't really center left anymore either.
Digging up things he said about the Sandinistas in the 80s, or taking out of context things that he said about Fidel Castro. And then more recently, don't say defund the police. It's going to offend our Lincoln Project people. And it's like, I'm sorry, it was millions and millions of leftists in this country held their nose to vote for Joe Biden for president. The Lincoln Project didn't sway a single vote. And yet, what do we have? We have a right-wing Democrat in the White House coming up January 20th in Joe Biden. And we have a party that just, I'm sorry, shits on the very people who put them in that position this time.
Absolutely.
So that's another reason why Steve Schmidt of the Lincoln Project, now declaring that he's become a Democrat, does not save him, does not help Steve. They are eviscerating Democrats in this.
Oh, yeah. That's who they're coming for. They don't care about the Republicans.
You've changed your military uniform to another enemy's uniform. Not the uniform you think you.
AOC said more nice things about Trump in this interview so far than she said about Lincoln Project people or
and I think one of the things that also is just so ugly about this too is that, first of all, I think there's a reason why this red baiting was a much larger feature this time around than it was.
I think we know where this is going.
Was in 2016, and I think it is because of the emergence of leftists of color in the United States. There's a very, very long and ugly history of the white political establishment in the United States red baiting in a particularly ferocious way when it is black.
I'll watch this all day. She wants to call Steny Hoyer and Nancy Pelosi racists. Let's watch this firefight.
People and people of color that are organizing for popular power, and particularly on class issues in the United States. You know, they did it to MLK, who was not a capitalist, was a democratic socialist. They did it to Malcolm X. And there's also just a very rich history of...
I think MLK may have been a Republican, although that's perhaps the movement itself, maybe she's...
That's one thing I actually... Did you see Steve Schmidt's tweets about how he was complaining that the headline said he'd registered Democrat? And he was like, it should say I've registered for the Democratic Party, and you have disrespected this party that is the oldest institution in the United States politics today, or whatever. I'm like, maybe you don't necessarily want to call back the early history of the Democratic Party right now. It doesn't seem like the most
black democratic socialist organizing in the United States. And all these folks that, we learn about as children in public schools were anti-capitalists. James Baldwin, Ella Baker, MLK, Malcolm X.
It's funny because other than MLK, I didn't learn about any of those people in public school. Mm-hmm. But it makes sense that she probably did.
Yeah.
We actually, when I went to public school, Christopher Columbus was a good guy. That is not the case anymore.
And they saw the writing on the wall of just the social destruction, the just chasing of concentrations of capital was bringing and is bringing to this country. And so when Democrats...
That's the BU talking right there.
Start to engage in this red baiting, and they engage in this, these protesters are gentrifiers or they're white people, essentially erasing all left activism of color in the United States. They may not know it, or maybe they do know it, but they are also participating in a very ugly legacy of white supremacy.
There you go. So I don't know here. Is the enemy of my enemy my friend, Alice?
I don't know if we're allowed to like her. I don't know. But...
Isn't the enemy of the enemy you?
What? Maybe. That's very profound, possibly, Sally. I don't know. Sally just said, is the enemy of the enemy you?
This political class and this kind of larger power in the Democratic Party, they need to say, they have to blame defund the police, because their actual political execution is so sorry, and it is so poorly done, thanks to a lot of the nepotism in Washington, because they're relying on these consultants that are not, frankly, very performance-driven.
Damn straight, AOC. She is absolutely right about that.
That if they acknowledge that they're the ones who failed, then what recourse do they have? What claim to authority do they have? So they have to engage in this red baiting.
She is dangerous little operator in Washington State, and I love it. I mean, and certainly you can tell that the ideology is deep and wide, and that she's read the playbook, and at this point they're just staging themselves for whatever action they're going to take. And is she canny enough to take an action to leverage what power she and her small? Well, I mean, she resonates. This ideology resonates, further than the squad. But is there enough of a constituency in Congress for them to do something?
I mean, she, though, is willing to work with populist Republicans. who also exist. I mean, look at what she said about working with Josh Hawley and stuff like that. Especially, I think Trump has opened the door to some of this on the right. An idea that you don't need to be a Paul Ryan wonky budget hawk to be in the Republican Party. That you can say, you know, relief for working people first before corporations, before businesses. And that's something that a space that Trump kind of created in the party, where you will see, I think, more people running in this mold and more people willing to work with an AOC and saying, I don't care what Mitch McConnell says I can do. I don't care who he says I can talk to. And you know, even it's interesting to me because you and I both were there kind of in the early Tea Party movement days. We were interested in conservative stuff that was happening. And, you know, a lot of people felt that the Tea Party was a very fiscal movement. Like a lot of people said T stood for text enough already, and that it was very liberty driven and very almost libertarian leaning and very anti-spending, that was sort of the big thing. And during the Obama years, that was messaging that was used a lot. But I think that Trump really, you know, took a lot of that Tea Party energy and channeled it into a place that has nothing to do with that is not worried about the national debt and is not worried about the deficits that Washington is running and is not necessarily ideologically against, say, stimulus checks for American citizens. And that I think that people who believed that that was the driving force of the Tea Party, that it was really just a bunch of regular people who just really cared about the national debt, I think that they were, you know, blind to what it really was and what those people really cared about. And I think a lot of them are these Obama Trump voters, the two-time Obama voters who went out and voted for Trump the next time around because they felt, you know, this is a person who cares about regular people. And I don't know if in either case they were necessarily correct, but I think those are the type of people who would like to see stimulus checks and don't really care about the other stuff that's in the stimulus bill. Right.
And I think now, in more than ever, since we've been told by our government to self-destruct our lives, I'm right with them.
Yeah, I mean,
figure the rest of the stuff out later. We've gone scorched earth on our own citizenry.
Right.
Screw this.
I saw a really great tweet from someone today who said basically, like, this isn't hard, Congress. If you make people's jobs illegal, you have to send them money.
Right.
That's the deal. You know, and I'm right there with you. I don't think people's jobs should be illegal. I don't think we should be shutting down gyms when it's like 0.00001% of gym visits are resulting in a COVID case. It's ridiculous. Gyms shouldn't be shut down. But if the people who own the gyms aren't allowed to show up at work, then we have to do something. You know, if their jobs are illegal, we can't, you know, just let them starve. This isn't Marie Antoinette let them eat cake time.
So I just got a message just showing that we've got these YouTube comments, and so I clicked on it, and I'm seeing there's a lively debate going on. Alice, is there some housekeeping that we need to get to before we say goodbye and start shoveling snow?
I mean, do you want me to read any news stories, or do we care? Or, I don't know.
Go ahead. See what do you got there?
Vanity Fair is running a very important piece here. This came out 4 hours ago. Now, I want you to imagine, if you will, Vanity Fair running a piece like this about one of Trump's kids if they were under investigation.
Okay.
Hunter Biden prepares for his first solo art show amid ongoing DOJ investigation. The president-elect's son revealed earlier this year that painting is literally keeping me sane.
He may have plenty of time for painting in the future. We'll see.
Yeah, the tweet says that Hunter Biden isn't letting the Department of Justice ruin his life. The one thing I have left is my art.
Well, and your dad, right?
And his kids. He has several kids, I believe.
Right, yes.
Including one recent one.
Right. Some on the grid, some not so much.
Right.
You got a big diamond from the Chinese. I mean, there's that.
So
you've got a place to forget it.
So he's in the middle of signing a deal to be represented as an artist by Georges Berger Gallery in New York City, with a solo exhibition in the works for next year, according to sources who spoke to Page Six. In February, Biden first revealed his artistic aspirations to the New York Times. For it's literally keeping me sane. For years, I wouldn't call myself an artist. Now I feel comfortable saying it.
Well, maybe we'll own a Biden one day.
The venture capitalist turned artist,
like
whose studio is in the pool house of his Hollywood Hills home, creates his work with a metal straw he uses to blow alcohol ink onto Japanese Yupo paper, creating abstract layers of color in concentric circles.
Is that the right discipline of artistry that he should be involved in?
Painting.
I don't know.
Painting puts my energy towards something positive, Biden explained. It keeps me away from people and places where I shouldn't be. He also added,
care to mention any, by the way?
The one thing I have left is my art. It's the one thing they can't take away from me or complete with anything else.
He's a victim. This is too good. All right, Alice.
All right, this has been the Burn Barrel Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Burn Barrel Pod, Facebook.com/Burn Barrel Podcast, Parler at Burn Barrel Podcast. You can go to our YouTube channel that Tom was mentioning. Apparently, there's a lively debate in the comments, so we can take a look at that. It's Tom Shattuck's Burn Barrel on there. Like a video, write us a review, and subscribe.
C'est la vie.